3 years ago, I purchased a farm with the hope of finally finding a serene retreat. No neighbors to disturb the peace, no incessant noise, and absolutely no drama. It was just me, the expansive countryside, and a quaint, weathered cottage I had longed to renovate. The land met all my desires: several acres of gently undulating pastures, a boundary of trees at the rear, and an old gate secured with a padlock at the entrance. Everything was straightforward, secluded, and entirely mine. However, Karen, the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, from the adjacent neighborhood, made an appearance. Initially, I assumed she was simply being friendly. She introduced herself on the day I was unloading my final moving boxes, offering a smile that seemed excessively bright and slightly insincere. Karen informed me that she was the HOA president from the nearby subdivision. She gestured vaguely towards the uniform houses about half a mile away and mentioned their interest in maintaining the neighborhood's appearance. I didn't give it much thought. I returned her smile, nodded, and explained that my property was outside their HOA boundaries, so I wasn't part of it. She chuckled somewhat awkwardly and responded, "Oh, of course not, but it's always good to be a good neighbor." That phrase would recur later, sending chills down my spine. But at the time, I dismissed it as casual conversation and continued unpacking. A few weeks later, Karen returned while I was outside fixing the old gate. The gate, made of heavy metal, swung across my driveway and had become rusted over time. It wasn't particularly attractive, but it served its purpose by keeping the property secure and providing the privacy I cherished. I had just finished painting it when I heard the sound of gravel crunching behind me. Karen stood there smiling once more, holding a plate of cookies. "I thought I'd bring you these," she said, handing me the plate. "Just a little welcome gift." I thanked her, and we exchanged a few words. Then she casually pointed towards the gate. "Some of the folks in our neighborhood were curious why it's locked. It's such a shame to keep such a lovely piece of land all closed off like that." I raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's locked. I value my privacy," I replied firmly. Her smile wavered momentarily before she quickly regained composure. "Oh, of course, I just meant it's such a beautiful area. It would be great for people to enjoy a walk or take in the view. You know, as good neighbors." There it was again. Good neighbors. I offered a polite laugh and mentioned my preference for solitude. She nodded, clearly displeased with my response. Before departing, she added, "If you ever want to make improvements to the property, the HOA has resources. We're always here to help." At the time, I didn't think much of it. Karen was somewhat assertive, but I attributed it to her personality. Little did I know this was merely the beginning. Several months passed without any issues. I spent my days tending to the farm, renovating the house, and relishing the tranquility. However, one evening, something unusual caught my attention on the security camera. Before we continue with the story, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's my dream to once reach 1,000 subscribers. Hope you can help me reach this dream. Now back to the story. The camera near the gate captured Karen standing at the entrance with a clipboard. She wasn't engaging in any activity, just standing there, observing the gate, jotting down notes, and occasionally looking around as if ensuring no one was watching. It was peculiar, but I dismissed it as routine documentation for the HOA. The following weekend changed everything. I was in the backyard, clearing some underbrush near the tree line, when I heard voices. At first, I thought they were coming from the road, but as I approached the fence, I saw two unfamiliar individuals within my property. They were walking along the field's edge, pointing at various things and chatting as if on a guided tour. "Excuse me?" I called out, approaching them. They recoiled, visibly startled, and began to stammer apologies. A woman in her 40s said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Karen mentioned it would be okay. She said you wouldn't mind if we took a quick walk around." I stared at her, stunned. "Karen said what?" I demanded. She explained. "She said this area is part of the neighborhood and open to residents. We just wanted to take a look." I was furious, but maintained my composure. "This is private property," I stated firmly. "Karen has no authority here. Please leave." They apologized again and hurried away, leaving me with more questions than answers. Why would Karen claim my property was part of the neighborhood? Was this a misunderstanding or something more sinister? The next day, I decided to address it directly. I visited the HOA office in the neighborhood and requested to speak with Karen. She welcomed me with her characteristic smile, but there was a hint of nervousness in her eyes when I brought up the trespassers. "Oh, that must have been a misunderstanding," she quickly responded. "I might have mentioned your property in passing, but I never authorized anyone to enter. I don't believe that's the case." Her tone seemed too dismissive and rehearsed, but without concrete evidence, there wasn't much I could do, so I let it go. However, before I left, she added, "If you ever want to join the HOA, we'd be happy to have you. It would make things so much simpler for everyone." That's when I realized this wasn't merely a misunderstanding. Karen wasn't just being nosy. She was attempting to bring my property under HOA control, and I had a sinking feeling this was only the start. That week, I enhanced my security measures around the property. If Karen or her HOA allies were persistent, I wanted to be prepared. Sure enough, the cameras captured her again a few nights later, taking more photos and making notes by the gate. Then a letter arrived from the HOA. The first line read, "We've noticed that your property is not currently in compliance with HOA guidelines." Compliance? I wasn't even part of the HOA. The envelope was simply addressed to me without any official HOA letterhead. Inside was a single typed page. "We, the members of Neighborhood Name HOA, respectfully request that you reconsider allowing limited community access to your property. Such access would greatly benefit the neighborhood, foster goodwill, and align with the community's aesthetic and recreational goals." The letter concluded with Karen's signature and a list of other HOA members' signatures. This wasn't just a letter, it was a petition. I couldn't believe they expected a petition to override my private ownership. Part of me laughed at their audacity, but another part was enraged. It seemed Karen had enlisted half the neighborhood in her scheme. I began to question their obsession with my property. What was Karen telling them to secure their signatures? And what exactly did they mean by limited access? Determined to find answers, I went directly to Karen's residence. When she opened the door, she didn't appear surprised to see me. In fact, she seemed rather smug. "Oh, hi there," she greeted in her usual overly sweet tone. I skipped the small talk, holding up the petition. "Care to explain this?" Karen glanced at it and shrugged. "Oh, that. It's just something a few neighbors wanted to do. No big deal." "No big deal?" I echoed. "You're trying to pressure me into opening my land to your neighborhood as if it were a public park. That's a big deal." Her smile faltered for a split second before she regained it. "It's not pressure. It's just encouragement. The neighborhood really admires your property, and we think it would be a wonderful addition to the community." "It's not part of the community," I countered. "It's private property, and it's staying that way." Karen's smile vanished entirely. She crossed her arms and said, "Well, I'm just trying to be a good neighbor. But if that's how you feel, I guess there's nothing more to discuss." Her dismissive response almost made me walk away, but something about her demeanor suggested she had another plan. Instead of leaving, I pressed further. "Why are you so interested in my property, Karen?" She blinked, clearly taken aback. "I'm not. I mean, we're not. It's just that a lot of people feel it would enhance the community." Her answer didn't satisfy me, but I knew I wouldn't get more information from her, so I left. The next day, odd things began happening around my property. First, I discovered a pile of trash, cans, wrappers, and even an old pair of shoes dumped just inside the tree line. I assumed some kids had wandered onto the land, but the cameras showed no one. 2 days later, I noticed fresh tire tracks near the back gate that hadn't been there before. Again, the cameras revealed nothing, but it was clear someone had accessed that area. Then, the most troubling incident occurred. One of my crops, a row of tomato plants I'd been cultivating, was completely trampled. Initially, I thought deer might have intruded, but there were no hoof prints, just flattened plants and disturbed soil, as if someone had walked through deliberately. I was livid and increasingly anxious. It felt like someone was sending a message, and I had a strong suspicion who it was. The final straw came a week later. While inspecting the property perimeter, I spotted something shiny in the dirt near the back fence. It was a piece of paper, wet and muddy, but still readable. It was another letter from the HOA, different from the petition. This one featured official letterhead and legal language, stating that my fence violated community standards and encroached on HOA land. The letter demanded that I remove the fence immediately or face further action. I couldn't believe it. My property wasn't part of the HOA, and I had verified the property lines when I purchased the farm. My fence was well within my boundaries. Karen had to be behind this, now involving the entire HOA. This wasn't just a minor power play. It was an all-out assault. I decided to retaliate. First, I hired a surveyor to re-examine the property lines. As expected, the results confirmed that my fence wasn't encroaching on any HOA land. In fact, the survey revealed something even more intriguing. A small strip of HOA landscaping, including a row of bushes and a decorative sign, was situated on my property. With this new evidence, I consulted a real estate attorney. He prepared a formal response to the HOA, demanding they stop their harassment and remove their landscaping from my land. Meanwhile, I upgraded my security system by adding more cameras, installing motion-activated lights, and putting up additional no trespassing signs to make my boundaries unmistakably clear. For a few weeks, things remained calm. I didn't see Karen, and there were no new letters or strange activities. I began to think she might have finally backed off. However, one night, my cameras caught her again. This time, she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by two other individuals, standing just outside the gate, pointing and discussing something. One held a measuring tape, and the other appeared to be examining blueprints. The footage was chilling. What was Karen planning next? The situation unraveled the following morning when I decided to call the HOA lawyer who had sent me the compliance violation letter. I wasn't expecting much, perhaps some vague legal language about community standards and misunderstandings. Instead, I uncovered the first significant flaw in Karen's plans. The lawyer sounded uneasy when I referenced the letter. After a brief hesitation, he admitted, "We were under the impression that your property fell within the HOA's jurisdiction." "Under the impression?" I responded, trying to suppress a laugh. "You didn't verify?" Mrs. Karen, the HOA president, provided documentation suggesting my property was within HOA boundaries. "If that's incorrect, we'd be happy to review." "Stop right there," I interrupted. "What documentation?" After a long pause, he confessed, "There were plans to annex the property into the HOA." "Annex my property?" I exclaimed. Hanging up, I immediately contacted my attorney. This wasn't merely Karen being intrusive or overstepping. It was a calculated attempt to incorporate my land into the HOA. Furthermore, annexing property isn't something an HOA can unilaterally decide. It requires city approval, legal filings, and most importantly, the owner's consent, all of which Karen lacked. Driven by equal parts anger and resolve, I decided to investigate further. I reached out to a friend working in local government zoning and land use. Within hours, she provided a file that nearly stunned me. Apparently, Karen had submitted a request months earlier to the city council to annex my property into the HOA, arguing it was neglected and that its inclusion would benefit the community under HOA regulations. She had included unauthorized photos of my farm and a list of fabricated complaints from supposed neighbors who deemed my property an eyesore and a nuisance. These lies infuriated me. My farm was not only well-maintained, but thriving. Regarding the complaints, I had never heard from any neighbors, and the petition fiasco indicated Karen was fabricating issues. I knew swift action was necessary. Karen's annexation request was scheduled for review by the city council in just 2 weeks. If approved, I would be forced into HOA control, subjected to their stringent rules, and potentially lose autonomy over my own land. So I took matters into my own hands. I went public with the evidence. I began by distributing copies of the surveyor's report, which clearly showed my fence was within my property lines and that the HOA's landscaping was encroaching on my land. I included screenshots from my security cameras showing Karen trespassing, taking photos, and bringing people onto my property without permission. Additionally, I provided a copy of her petition and a detailed timeline of all incidents, from the trespassers to the violation letter. I posted everything online, tagging local neighborhood groups, city council members, and even the HOA's social media accounts. The headline read, "The HOA president who tried to steal my farm." The response was overwhelming. Neighbors I had never met reached out to apologize for Karen's behavior, expressing surprise at her actions. Some admitted they felt coerced into signing the petition, believing it was merely a formality. The real turning point came when Karen's own HOA board learned of the situation. It turned out Karen had been keeping her plans secret, even from the board, claiming she was managing a difficult neighbor situation. Upon reviewing the evidence I had shared, several board members quickly distanced themselves from her. One middle-aged man named Dave confided in me that Karen had been misusing HOA funds to pay for her lawyer and the landscaping near my property. "She said it was for the neighborhood's benefit," he explained, shaking his head. "But now it looks like she was just trying to take over your land." With the HOA board turning against her and the city council inundated with complaints from disgruntled neighbors, Karen's influence began to collapse. However, she wasn't finished. The night before the council hearing, my cameras captured her attempting to remove the no trespassing signs I had installed. Armed with bolt cutters in one hand and a flashlight in the other, she was clearly trying to undermine my security measures. I immediately called the sheriff's department. When the deputies arrived, Karen attempted to portray herself as a concerned neighbor inspecting property lines, but the deputies were skeptical. They reviewed the camera footage, saw her trespassing, and issued her a citation. She was visibly enraged as they escorted her off my land. The city council hearing was the decisive moment. Equipped with my comprehensive evidence, my attorney and I presented an irrefutable case demonstrating that Karen's annexation request was based on false claims and unauthorized actions. Several neighbors attended to speak on my behalf, condemning Karen's misconduct and demanding accountability. The council unanimously voted to reject the annexation request and initiated an investigation into Karen's actions, particularly her misuse of HOA funds. In the ensuing weeks, Karen resigned as HOA president under intense pressure from both the board and the community. Her lawyers severed ties with her, and the unauthorized landscaping on my property was quietly removed. As for me, I finally achieved the peace and solitude I had sought when moving to the farm. The HOA ceased all attempts to interfere, and I formed new friendships with neighbors who were equally frustrated with Karen's behavior.